Endgame automates the hunt for both known and never-before-seen adversaries in enterprise networks. Built on unique knowledge on the adversary's tools, techniques, and tactics, Endgame's centrally managed agent prevents, detects, and responds to advanced adversaries in the earliest stages of the kill chain without prior knowledge. Endgame. Automate the hunt. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/PSW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. Welcome everyone to Cigar Conversations. I'm so excited to do this first. I guess you'd call it an episode. I don't know. It's kind of like a crossing of streams kind of thing. So I'm Paul Sidorian. I'm hoping this segment will air both on the Security Weekly Network and the Stogie Geeks Network. To help me out with Cigar Conversations, I have Mr. Matt Alderman, which you all know and love from previous work at Tenable, on our shows, and today he works for Layered Insight. And he's also a fellow cigar enthusiast.
Yes, but I always have to let you pick because you always pick the best.
Matt's like, I just want you to do all the
I love to smoke it. You just tell me what to smoke.
Tell me what's good, which is awesome. So the purpose of this is that I'm going to ask Matt security questions. Matt's going to ask me cigar questions, and hopefully it'll come out good, and we'll cross the streams.
We'll get to use it, yeah.
And you get to learn a little bit about security, and you get to learn a little bit about cigars, all in the same segment.
Yeah.
How awesome is that?
Yeah, it's cool.
So we're probably should have had more information. This is Tatuaje. Some people call us the brown label, but it's the Tatuaje Miami. And this is the Nuea size. I don't remember the blend, other than it's mostly Nicaraguan tobacco that they're using in here. This comes from a box that's dated 2014, so this has some age on it. Age in cigars is good, in case that was one of your questions, Matt.
Oh.
Age on cigars is good.
Age is good.
Age is good.
Kind of like scotch,
whiskey,
wine.
Podcast hosts, right? I mean, we're more vintage now.
This is security curmudgeons.
Security curmudgeons. Sure. All right, Matt, why don't you go first and ask me a question about cigars, since we just got started?
Yeah, let's do that. I'm interested in some of the Cuban side of this, right? Because everybody knows, Cuban cigars and all the hype and all the beauty around the Cubans, and so it intrigues me on some of the historical pieces. So the Cuban embargo banning the importation of cigars and other goods from Cuba went into effect in what year?
1962.
Do you know why?
That was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yes,
basically the Russians had put missiles in Cuba and pointed them at the U.S. And so to basically destroy the economy of an enemy nation, we imposed an embargo on all goods that were imported from Cuba into the U.S. That includes cigars, rum, and any other goods. Also, I don't think we can sell. There's some restriction on selling goods to Cuba because they all drive cars from the 1950s.
Yeah, the 50s.
No, the 60s,
yeah.
50s
yeah,
and 60s.
60s,
yeah.
You see them in all the, you see the old classics. Now, Obama lifted part of that embargo, right?
No. See, the first part is very straightforward, right? 1962, we know exactly why the embargo was in place, and it was a full embargo. Over the years, presidents have lifted various restrictions and reenacted various restrictions over the years, depending on who's been the president of the United States. So some of the restrictions have been largely centered around how much money you can send to your family in Cuba. So if you have family living in Cuba, you could only send them a certain amount of dollars, or maybe none at all. Those restrictions have shifted. I'm not sure where we stand on that. I think there's also been restrictions about immigration. Like if you come over, can you get your family to come over? There's always been restrictions on travel and or visiting Cuba. Sometimes,
but they lifted some of that because we've had friends go over and visit Cuba.
Yes, now I believe the restriction has been lifted such that you can visit. It used to be you had to visit as a journalist, and some people would go get permission from the DOD essentially to say, I want to go there, or the State Department rather, and so you would basically like pretend to be a journalist, and they're like, yeah, whatever. There was such a small number of people that I don't think they really cared. But when they lifted restrictions, you could travel there. Now, some of the restrictions have said you can't bring anything back, right? Obama was the most judicious in allowing for the most freedoms in visiting Cuba, and basically said you can bring back X amount of goods from Cuba.
Which included Cuban cigars, I believe, right?
It includes cigars or rum and any other good. Fruits and vegetables might be a thing.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Generally, you can't. Any kind of soil or plant, anything like that. But cigars and rum are okay to bring back. I mean, those are the two primary exports from Cuba.
So is it still, because I know some of the restrictions went back, can you still legally bring Cubans into the States now? Because when Trump came in, he changed some of that. But I don't know if the Cuban cigars are still are legally allowed in or not. You know, back in the day, I used to bring them from Canada back across the border when I lived in Ohio, and that's how we kind of would get them in. But I knew it was legal for a while, but I don't know if that's still legal to bring them in or not.
Well, I think you can still, if you go to Cuba, you can bring them in.
Okay.
Right? We can't call up a Cuban cigar factory and say, hey, can you send me a crate of Cuban cigars to distribute? So the embargo is still, I think that was largely what most people misunderstood, is that the embargo is very much in place today. We still cannot import goods. The restrictions have been if I can travel there and how much or what I can bring back. Yeah.
Got it.
I'm not sure where it ended with the Trump administration. I want to say Will Cooper, who was on the Stogie Geek show before, traveled to Cuba when there were the Obama era restrictions in place.
Got it.
And was able to bring cigars back.
Cool.
Which some of them he gave to me.
Which is great.
Thanks, Will.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So now I'm going to ask Matt, security. So Matt, how did you get your start in information security?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, my early part of my career was on the IT side. I worked nuclear power for 7.5 years.
Yeah, you said that in a segment we did earlier.
Yeah, industrial control systems.
Where did you go to school and how did you get into it?
Yeah, so when I graduated high school, I ended up getting a scholarship from Toledo Edison, which is now First Energy. Back then, Centauri Energy owned First Energy and Cleveland Electric Illuminating Company.
Oh, sorry,
I grew up in Ohio.
Grew up in Ohio, okay.
Grew up just outside of Toledo in a little town called Fremont. When I got the scholarship, they said you can go to any school you want. It's got to be in the state of Ohio. So I was already accepted to Case Western Reserve University, which is in Cleveland. Started there as an electrical engineer, and I did internships at the nuclear plant during the summers. When I graduated, I took a full-time job, and I had shifted from more electrical engineering into the computer side. We were updating the real-time plant computer systems at one of the they own 2 nuclear power plants, Davis-Besse Nuclear Power Plant, which is near Toledo, Perry Nuclear Power Plant, which is on the east side of Cleveland. So I worked at both, but I did all my computer work at Perry Nuclear Power Plant. Decided to get my master's degree in computer engineering, and in '96, when I got my master's, I said, I don't think I'm going to stay in nuclear power. Nuclear power is a pretty specialized. You had a lot of Navy nukes coming into the commercial nuclear power plants. Kind of ran them more like a nuclear ship than anything else. I didn't feel that was the right place for me, so I left the plant in '96, and I ended up working for a consulting firm based out of Columbus, Ohio, called the NC Group. And my
NCC Group?
NCC Group.
Okay, I remember that. Yeah.
And my first projects were replacing antivirus at one of the major banks in Cleveland. Then it was doing NT security. Then it was doing checkpoint firewalls, and then PIX firewalls, IDS, IPS.
Did you run checkpoint firewalls on the Nokia Ipso platform?
No, I didn't do any of those.
Probably Solaris then, right?
Yeah, it was Solaris back then.
I did.
And Windows was there was some early Windows coming out, but it was mostly Solaris.
The Nokia Ipso platform came later.
Yeah, it came later, and by then, Cisco had made pretty big inroads. So the first part of my career was all consulting. Yeah. Started in '96, and I consulted for a number of years, doing various security projects, building out, demilitarized zones for healthcare, for financial institutions, as everybody was getting ready for HIPAA and Graham-Leach-Bliley and all those regulatory requirements. Yeah. And so that's where my early career started. It was all
And then
consulting.
It was pretty much like RSA, kind of your own thing,
No, so I did my own thing.
And then RSA bought your...
No, so it's kind of interesting. So in 2003, so I went to a number of resellers. CompuCom, NC Group got bought by CompuCom. I did some work for Sarcom, which was a Ohio-based reseller. MRK Technologies was a Cleveland-based reseller, and I was building out their security practices. I was building out the services side. And in 2003, I ended up going on my own. Decided to do my own consulting. I built 3 kind of practices under these resellers. And said, wait, I can do this on my own. So in 2003, I formed my own consulting company, and I landed a contract at one of the large national banks running their third-party vendor management program. Back then, it was Graham Leach Bliley forcing the banks to look at their third-party risk.
Yes.
I ran that whole program, 70,000 vendors, just crazy, all Excel spreadsheets and email. And I had this really crazy idea with a guy that I worked with who became my co-founder to build a product. And so at first we looked around the market to see what was out there. Archer was there in the early days, but Archer was more focused on the IT security, not really third-party vendor management. And a couple other companies we looked at, and we ended up writing the tech specs for what we eventually built under Accuvant. So in 2004, I picked up the family. We moved from Cleveland. Spent a good chunk of my career in Cleveland. My wife, we met at school. I had 3 kids born all in Cleveland. And in 2004, we literally picked up the families. We moved to Colorado. It was kind of a long-range plan. And I merged my consulting business in with Accuvant out of Denver at the time. And really what they wanted me to do was build their compliance services practice, which I did, but I also had this idea for a product. And they're like, we'll see if we ever build it. So I get there August of 2004. A month later, we've already got 2 contracts, and customers are asking for a product. So we built one of the early GRC products under the Accuvant compliance practice. We used to call it
GRC is
governance, risk management, and compliance.
Gotcha.
It wasn't named GRC then. That name didn't really come into the market until about 2007 when Archer kind of worked with Forrester and some of the analysts to define the space. See, I missed my category definition back then. It would have helped a lot. But yeah, then so we built that for almost 2 years under Accuvant, and then spun it out in Colorado under the name of Control Path. Ran that company for a couple years. That got sold to Trustwave. Trustwave kind of really wanted it for PCI.
It's interesting how you spun in and out and back into very similar consulting companies.
Yeah, it is. And so I go into Trustwave, bring the product in. Kind of got stabbed in the back at Trustwave. Took my engineering team, and that's when we went to Qualys.
Okay.
So I went to Qualys from my startup. We really went to Qualys. The vision back then was Philippe thought he could build GRC Lite into the cloud platform. He didn't see the need for Archer or any of the really big GRCs, that if you could add some capabilities on top of what he was doing already on the scanning side, that we could build a GRC Lite on the platform. So I went over, helped build out policy compliance at Qualys, all the self-assessment questionnaire stuff that eventually came into the platform, some of the workflow stuff was all re-implementations of the stuff we were doing at Control Path. Then I went to Archer. So I went to Archer in 2012.
Oh, I see. So then it was Qualys, Archer. And then you went to Tenable.
Then I went to Tenable.
Oh, okay. So you were coming out of RSA.
Yeah, I was leaving RSA. Gotcha. I was working on a lot of the strategy and rebranding of the Archer portfolio when I decided to come down and run strategy for Tenable.
That's awesome. Alrighty. So, and most of our listeners know the story from there about how Matt and I met.
Yeah.
So
how we got together from there.
That's it. So Matt, you have a cigar question for me.
I do have a cigar question for you. Picked or primed tobacco leaves are hung in barns, also known as Casa de Tabac, for approximately how many days before moving to the next stage?
I have the answer here because I can't remember all the top of my head, but that is 50 days.
And that's the drying process?
So when the tobacco leaves first come off the plants and they're hung in those barns, that is the curing process. The initial curing process of tobacco. Then it moves to fermentation, and then it moves to aging.
Got it.
And everyone does their aging differently. and that can even depend on the type of cigar. So they may roll the whole cigar and age it for a certain amount of time. They may age the individual leaves for a certain amount of time, and how much time when it goes from leaves into a rolled cigar and how long it's aged varies very greatly across the industry.
Got it.
Your process, I was talking with Edna Conway about intellectual property, and she made me realize that your intellectual property isn't necessarily the written down recipe, right? Of, I'm going to get these tobacco seeds, we're going to grow these plants, and I'm going to put this many of this leaf in my cigar and this many of this leaf in my cigar. Anyone could have that recipe. No one can duplicate what Tatuaje, Padron, and Fuente are doing because their intellectual property is the process. Like, you plant the seed, okay, what kind of fertilizer do you put in it? What kind of pest control do you use? And they don't use chemicals in any of these processes, obviously. You know, cayenne pepper might go on the plants to prevent bugs. You may prime the leaves at this time. You may use a different kind of, soil or planting. Like, there are so many if we're talking about machine learning, like machine learning factors that you take into consideration that are all variances to the growing process. And that's where I thought was interesting, where it kind of transferred over into security, was any cigar manufacturer's intellectual property is the whole process. Like, what is that process? We know the ingredients, how you put those ingredients together. That is your intellectual property. And to be frank, some of it could not be replicated because you need those specific climates and soil. Right. I mean, if you've grown anything, any kind of plants or vegetables at home, that like soil and the amount of water matters.
And the amount of sun and all those variations.
The whole thing.
Now back to the construction of the cigar, is there a belief on which of those makes a better cigar? Do you roll the whole thing and age the whole thing? Do you age the individual components, then roll it and re-age it?
Yeah.
Is there any? It doesn't. It's all
different.
Okay.
It's all different. Yeah.
So there's not one approach or anything that's better than the other?
Everyone varies. And anyone, like we talk about Padron, right? They may have a line of cigars where they age the leaves for X amount of days, and then they roll it and they age it for X more amount of days. A different brand, they may say, well, we're going to roll it a little sooner and then age it a little longer or whatever. So it definitely varies based on the tobacco that they're using.
Interesting. An interesting process.
It absolutely is. So what's the most challenging part of your security career today?
Today or ever?
Either one.
Oh, interesting. Today, today's interesting for me, right? Based on kind of how my career's progressed in the security side, right? I started in consulting.
Sure.
Then I moved into product, learned product management, and then into marketing.
Now you're in a startup, which you have startup challenges.
Yeah, and now I'm in a startup, and I'm actually advising startups. And so as my career's evolved, I think the biggest challenge for me is when people want to hire somebody like me, what job, what role do I play? Because I've done so many different things in my career, from product management to product marketing to marketing, even to some of the advisory investment stuff.
Even at Tenable, while you were in the strategy group, you were advising the marketing and product marketing areas of the business.
Yeah, we were actually redoing licensing and pricing, packaging, some of the go-to-market stuff, right? So if somebody were to come to me today and say, all right, I want to hire Matt Alderman, what role do you play? It's really hard for me to answer that because I can play different roles in an organization. So that's a little bit challenging today. I think the biggest challenge for me career-wise, though, was having a startup and watching it die.
Yeah. That's what
I learned a ton through that experience. But, I spent almost 5.5 years of my career with this concept of building a product, bringing it out, architecting it, getting customers, only at the end of the day to watch it fail. And I think that's the hardest thing to deal with a little bit, is that failure. But you learn from that experience, right? I had a very positive experience at Qualis. That company went IPO. We did a lot of really good work at RSA. The stuff we did at Tenable was fantastic.
It was much fun.
Just think about all the changes we made when we got there to get the company on the track to go to IPO. I mean, obviously, a lot of other people had to do a lot of work and finish that process. But that was a really great ride. And to watch the success of that, fantastic, right? I mean, personally, for me, Tenable is right now probably one of my greatest achievements, even though I didn't stay to the end.
Sure.
But just to watch where that company ended up and the work that a lot of us did to get it there was just fantastic.
I had to give my notice at Tenable to you and Melinda. So Matt and I worked together, obviously, at Tenable. I was like teary-eyed, man. Like, and we all knew when we got on the phone.
And I knew it was coming.
Like, Matt knows when I call in Melinda, who was my manager at the time, and Matt, who was the director, when I called them both in for me and didn't tell them what it was about, they both knew I was leaving.
Yeah, and we knew it.
And I was just like teary-eyed, emotional.
But we also kind of knew why you did it.
Yeah.
Right? You wanted to spend more time doing this and growing the podcast. And look, you know, the things we were able to leverage the podcast for at Tenable, some of the shows we did back then, kind of sharing the vision was great. But what you've been able to do with the podcast series since then has been fantastic with, Enterprise Security Weekly, taking some of that competitive research work that we were doing at Tenable and turn that into a show. Business Security Weekly.
Those are all little mini startups, man.
Yeah.
Whenever you start a new show, they're like mini startups. And I've had some fail too. That's okay. Like you don't get anywhere in life if you don't make mistakes and pick it back up and go on to the next thing.
Right. Exactly.
And so you got to have those failures, and it's part. If you don't have failures, you don't have success.
Right.
Because you're not trying.
Right. And you need to learn from those and figure out what works the next time. Right. And
cigar manufacturers do the same thing, because they'll come out with so many different cigars, and even cigar manufacturers that I love, they'll come out with a new cigar, and I'm like, wow, I really don't like it. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad cigar or they did a bad job or something like that, but I just like I don't like that cigar, and that might have been a miss for them in the market, and that happens, and they got to pick up the pieces and go back to the drawing board and blend something else.
Right.
So in that sense too, even with cigar manufacturers, every new cigar brand is like a new startup for them. It's a new brand.
It's kind of a whole new.
Yeah, it has its own messaging behind it. It has its own personality. It has its own target market. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they can either succeed or fail, just like startups can.
Absolutely.
Right. Exactly. All right. Let's see. Where are we going next? Oh, we need a lighter. Can somebody? Oh, we forgot the lighter over there.
I got it. I think John did it. Okay. I got a lighter and a cutter.
All right. We won't need the cutter unless we go really long. Yeah. But.
Yeah, we should limit cigar conversations. It's a one cigar conversation. It doesn't mean we have to necessarily talk the entire time we're smoking it. I've got some cigars we could have like a 6-hour podcast.
I don't think we want to go there. All right, let's see. Oh, the first successful commercial crop in the U.S., cultivated in 1612 in what state?
That is Virginia.
So, do you know some of the history about the first plantings in the U.S.? Because I think it's a little interesting.
It is interesting. I think tobacco that's produced here in the U.S. is a very interesting market, and it's highly specialized, right? If you look at a state like Connecticut, Connecticut today produces tobacco specifically for the cigar industry, and it's actually used in a very high percentage of cigars today. Tatawahe, for example, uses a lot of Connecticut broadleaf in his portfolio.
Got it.
Drew Estate has been pretty famous for using what they call Connecticut broadleaf, which is a specific region, River Valley in Connecticut, where they grow broadleaf under certain conditions. I want to say in Connecticut, some of it can be shade grown, which means they actually stand up cheesecloths on like steaks. I think it's more sophisticated than that in some, but like back in the day with cheesecloth and steaks. Right now they might have a structure that they build over the crops to shade it from the sun so it doesn't get as much nutrients. That produces what we call those Connecticut wrappers. Those light Connecticut shade wrappers are actually grown under the shade.
Oh, nice.
Now it's interesting in Ecuador, when it's called an Ecuadorian Connecticut, they don't use shade, but due to the climate, there's always shade from the clouds during the growing season.
So they get natural cloud.
A natural shade
yeah.
grown versus what is typically a Connecticut shade grown. And then you have Connecticut broadleaf where they don't shade it, and it gets really, really dark and thick and oily. And they primarily use that on wrapper leaves for many different cigars.
Got it. Then the rest of, so this tobacco then in Virginia rest, was all for cigarettes then, basically?
Yeah, so the rest of the U.S. market over time, I think back in the day there were a lot of cigar tobacco plants being grown. A lot of it was cigarettes. And what a lot of people don't know is it's actually two different plants. Like they're two different strains, completely different strains of the plant. One produces cigar tobacco, one produces cigarette tobacco. There's also applications for not hand-rolled, but machine-rolled cigars as well. And don't forget, tobacco is also used in smokeless products as well. Right. So you're chewing tobacco, your dips, and things like that.
Yep.
So the various states over time have made cigars and have made grown other types of tobacco for those different markets.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because obviously cigarettes are pretty popular here, so the tobacco for the cigarettes, yes, right.
I think we have people walking in front of the camera while we're recording. This is why we're recording this live at DEF CON in the pool cabana. It's okay. We understand that we're live in the pool cabana and things happen. It's totally okay. It's really hot, actually.
It is.
It's kind of warm right now.
Yeah, it's the longer we go, the more sweat that beads up on our foreheads.
Yes. Yeah, so that's, and so there's also something here about Pennsylvania, too. Pennsylvania has kind of reemerged to grow tobacco for the cigar industry. It tends to be a much stronger, they call it Pennsylvania broadleaf.
Got it. And then are those all the cigar tobacco primarily for wrappers in the U.S. or is
Depends.
It also okay?
In the U.S., mostly wrappers, although they're probably. It depends on what they want to do with the rest of the plant. Like some plants are really efficient about, all of the different primings go somewhere. Like some go to machine-rolled cigars, some go to lower-end bundled cigars. So it could be different components of that cigar based on what they can prime off of that plant. So
yeah, interesting. You don't think of the U.S. as being a big producer.
You don't, but it is
cigar.
A pretty major, especially Connecticut. For sure.
Very good.
Well, this is a good question, Matt, because we haven't really talked about hiring in security. We talked a lot about vendor coverage.
Yeah.
But we haven't talked about hiring, and there was a whole career zone at Black Hat. There's a career area, a lot of people doing recruiting here at DEF CON trying to get security talent. If you we're looking to hire one security person for an organization, what qualities would you look for in that person?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on the role, right? If you're looking for a security analyst, for example, which is probably where most people are hiring these days, right? They're looking for people, security analysts to work in the SOC,
at various skill levels,
right? At various skill levels,
entry-level SOC analyst versus like we call that one ninja in the organization.
But what I like, I like guys that have gone through engineering programs personally. Now, some days it's whether an engineering degree is required or not as part of this job is a debate that many have had. But I like engineers because engineers go through a very specific set of curriculum of problem solving. And if you think about going through your engineering career,
build, break, fix. I think security engineers need those three things. I think engineers have those qualities of build, break, fix.
Right. And so because the problem varies. And so if you have the base skills on how to solve problems on the engineering side, because you've gone through that curriculum, then I think you're in a really good place to solve these problems around security, because things are constantly changing in our industry, right? The attacks are changing and the way things are attacked and the technology. And so I like somebody with that core engineering background, typically in a security analyst role, because they've got some of those fundamental problem-solving skills that will help them solve some of these security challenges.
I agree. Troubleshooting and problem solving is probably the most important skill set when you're looking for that security engineer or analyst, right?
Right. Yeah. For that side. Now, if it's somebody more public facing, then the written verbal skills also become very important to me, because the ability to communicate with the business is another key element that I think we lack a little bit in the security industry. We tend to talk very techies and technical. But if you can bridge the gap over to the business side and be able to explain some of the problems, some of the risks, some of the challenges in the space, and help to educate those business folks that really don't understand the core problems of security and where some of the attacks are, I think those skills are very important for somebody that's a little more outbound focus, whether it's definitely in a CISO role that's going to have to report up to the board, your different management layers who are going to have to constantly communicate with business leaders and being able to articulate where some of these challenges are. Those verbal and even some of those written skills are also a really important component that I would look for in my hiring.
If you combine those skills, that's a really awesome person to have on your team.
And really hard to find.
Someone that has good troubleshooting skills and also good communication skills.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they're hard to find, too.
Absolutely. So we're back on cigars.
All right. Back onto cigars.
Full of useless knowledge about cigars.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I enjoy it because I don't know all the pieces.
Yeah, and these were trivia questions that we did on cigars, and we did some scoring on them, and so we're kind of using them as a guide to our conversation to dig more into some of the topics that we ask in these trivia-style questions.
Yeah, so in what year did Davidoff cease production of cigars in Cuba? This is back to Cuba a little bit.
Yeah, so Davidoff stopped producing cigars in Cuba in 1991. And that's kind of a trick question because I wanted people to say, well, they stopped when there was the embargo. They didn't. They continued for many, many years after that.
And then where is it produced now?
So Davidoff is their tobacco is primarily sourced in the Dominican Republic and their factories in Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when they closed down, so were they using some of that Cuban just for the Cuba market because they couldn't, or even they could have? I guess they could have sent it to the European markets and other things.
So that's the primary market for Cuban cigars today is Europe. By far. If you talk to anyone that is a cigar smoker in Europe today, like there's Cubans on the shelves and then there's like a few other things, but most people just go in and they smoke Cuban cigars.
And so then when they stop production in Cuba, then everything's pretty much now in the Dominican Republic.
Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the piece I didn't know.
There was probably some kind of political climate or something that happened in Cuba that finally drove them out in 1991, where they pretty much abandoned that Cuban product marketed in Europe. And what they've done and what a lot of cigar manufacturers do is they will market specific brands or slight tweaks on the brand and they'll market it to Europe. What a lot of times they do is they try and mirror the sizes and flavor profile of Cuban cigars in their own brand. So a really strong cigar that maybe comes out of the Dominican or Nicaragua typically won't be marketed to the European market. They'll typically blend something mild to medium, strength-wise, and market that. Sometimes those only end up in Europe. And sometimes I find them and I smoke them, I'm like, I like that better than anything else they produced in this line because I like that medium strength but full flavor cigar.
So did Davidoff see a fall off then in some of their European sales when they pulled out some of their Cuban styles?
Probably in the 90s, probably not. The 90s is what we refer to as the cigar boom. Economic factors, sports stars popularizing cigars. There was like this tipping point. I've read the book Tipping Right. There was a tipping point in the 90s for cigars where all of a sudden they exploded in popularity such that they couldn't keep up with demand.
So even though they weren't selling Cuban cigars into the European market, they were able to backfill that with the Dominican Republic, build enough of a brand there.
They couldn't make them fast enough in the 90s. In fact, Dominican cigars actually got a bad reputation, I think, because they came up with a process to grow and quickly produce Connecticut shade cigars in the Dominican Republic. I think they take Connecticut seeds and they grow those plants in Dominican. So the Dominican Connecticut market exploded. And they were producing these really cheap, Connecticut-based cigars from Dominican, and everyone was buying them up and smoking them in the 90s because everyone just smoked everything. Quality went way down. And it took the industry a while to really recover from that. After the boom ended, there was a big dip. And a lot of cigar companies were hurting someone on a business until they could recoup that market and really build the consumer faith in the cigar industry again.
Right, and bring that quality back.
Because the quality was atrocious.
Right.
The quality coming out of Cuba is still kind of atrocious to this day.
Oh, is it?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, it's a communist country. Your job is to work in a cigar factory. Like, there's no merit for doing it any faster. You know, it's communism or socialism, right?
Right.
There's no incentive for them to get any better. So you tend to have a much lower quality cigar construction-wise that comes out of Cuba. Typically, they'll be plugged or just not be rolled correctly.
Oh, interesting. I haven't seen many of those,
but
I don't
Davidoff, a Davidoff cigar, very, very, if ever, have an issue with construction.
Got it.
Yeah, Henke Kellner's the master blender for Davidoff, and it's just one of the. We have these kind of figures in the cigar industry that many people who smoke cigars don't know about. And there's probably roughly a dozen. And they're like our security luminaries, right? They're like when we have the Bruce Schneier's on the show and Marcus Random, and these are the visionaries and luminaries. We have those in cigars too, and most people don't know who they are, which is a shame.
Right.
So Henke Kellner, Ernesto Perez Carrillo, and so many, Manuel Anoa from La Aurora. These people know, like, forgotten more about tobacco than like I will ever know. Like, they are just they're such experts in their craft. And Henke's the one for Davidoff.
Got it. See, I'm learning.
I told you I'm full of useless cigar knowledge. Oh yeah, now I got to ask you a question.
Yeah, now it's your turn.
All right. So, let's see. Who's the most influential security person in security today?
Oh, in security today?
Today. I guess we could also cover, like, back in time. Who's the most influential?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard one to answer. In my career, there's a couple interesting ones, right?
Sure.
Wow.
So in rap music, right? My presentation coming up at DerbyCon is about hip-hop and its intersections into security. And someone posted on Facebook and asked, who's the most influential hip-hop group or rap group of all time? And I said, hands down, it's NWA. And everyone had all these other answers. They were more about artists that they like or artists that were popular or artists that did well. And I thought about the question it's about who is the most influential. And when I think influential, it means you influence likely some kind of change in the industry, right? NWA was influential for several reasons, which is why it's not just one reason. There's more than one, right?
Right.
For one, they created an entirely new genre of music and gangster rap, right?
Right.
That was huge. They also introduced the parental advisory explicit lyrics. I have one of the original NWA albums, and it's before they standardized on parental advisory explicit lyrics, and their album is what triggered the whole censorship movement and anti-censorship movements. And the third, their song "Fuck the Police," right, brought about some huge issues at the time, issues we still struggle with today as a society. Right. They brought those to the forefront of pop culture, all with that one album. So that's what I mean by influential, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if it's that clear cut.
In security, how do you, like in rock and roll, you can point to the Beatles, right? Another music example, sure. Yeah. In cigars, I would also struggle in cigars to figure out who is the most
Because, I mean, there's been some really influential folks through the years. The Art Coviello and what he did with RSA and to EMC and the work he's done there. Amit Uran and the work that Amit's done, right? I've worked for Amit twice at RSA and briefly at Tenable before I left. I mean, you look at some of the histories of those guys. You got the Dave DeWalt's of the world. I mean, there's just some really... there's just some really influential guys that have done a really great job.
And those are ones in your career. I think it's easier to say who's the most influential in my career, to say who's influenced the industry as a whole, because it's hard.
It's really hard. Philippe Corteau influenced a big part of my career.
Sure.
When I built Control Path as a hosted kind of product, right, I didn't know what scale was, right? I remember, Qualis was one of the ones that was interested in acquiring Control Path. There's a whole story behind why I chose TrustWave. We could do the whole segment on that experience someday for anybody who wants to understand, the decisions you have to make as a founder when you have to sell, right? And we were sitting in the due diligence session, and we were talking about scalability, and we were talking about our numbers, and Philippe looks over and he says, "Show me how you scale to 500,000 assets." 500,000 assets. We were like, how would we even do that, right? And it wasn't about the data. It was about how do you display 500,000 assets, right? And Sean Malloy, who we brought over to Tenable to build out Tenable.io, was my chief architect at Control Path. We have a huge.
Oh, I didn't know that he worked. Oh,
he worked for me
so
back
Sean,
then.
I didn't know that. Sean, for our audience, is one of the most brilliant cloud and security architects I think,
hands
that
down.
I've ever met.
I mean,
it's just amazing.
When I hired him in 2005 to be chief architect for Control Path to build out the product, and I remember the question, and I remember Sean just thinking on the fly and then starting to figure out how he can render 500,000 assets. I mean, Qualys today, for people who don't really truly understand the power of the cloud platform, last time I talked to Sumedh Thakar, which was on the way to Singapore a couple weeks ago, he said they're processing 250 billion records a day.
Wow.
I mean, you want to talk about scale, right? 250 billion records a day. Back then we were trying to figure out how to take a GRC product and scale it to 500,000 assets. I mean, what I learned from him around cloud, the power of cloud, the power of the platform, the scale, I mean, that had a huge influence on me as a young product guy, because I was, as a founder, you don't necessarily think of yourself as a product guy, right? But then you learn product management and you learn requirements and how to build those. That experience went to me when I went to Archer to work on some of the scalability issues and how we integrate the data with NetWitness. It obviously led to the whole vision of how we were going to have to eventually build out what became Tenable.io in the cloud, why we brought Sean over to build it. I mean, he had a huge impact on my career early on. And look, he's a pioneer. If you want to talk about cloud security pioneers, I mean, Philippe had a vision in '99 to build the security product in the cloud.
That was way ahead of anyone else.
Way ahead of where anybody was thinking, right? I mean, just a true pioneer. So, I mean, these are the kinds of guys, I work for Art Covial, I've worked for Amit Yoran, I've worked for Philippe Courteau. I know Dave DeWalt and some of the great stuff he did at McAfee and FireEye. There's some just great people out there, so it's hard to just pick one.
Right. Yeah, I have three in my career that come to mind, and I'm pretty sure you know all three of them. Stephen Northcutt, very early on, was instrumental in giving me a chance in the industry and giving me opportunities that he didn't have to give me those opportunities, but he did because he believed in me, and that was awesome. Mike Yaffe certainly was one of the pioneers to allow me to realize that people would actually pay me to do a podcast. So I have to thank him for that, and he's been an advisor to me ever since. And of course, none other than Ron Gula. I mean,
Ron's another one.
Sponsored the show, did interviews, gave me an opportunity at Tenable, which was just an amazing, change to my career. One of the most influential changes to my career was my time at Tenable, and we still continue to work with Ron to this day, which is so awesome.
And I mean, what Ron did at Enterasys with Dragon, what he did with Tenable, I remember our first sales kickoff meeting. I don't know if you remember the first Tenable sales kickoff in 2015.
Was I in attendance at that one?
I think
in Florida?
You were. Yeah, it was in Florida.
Yeah, I think I was there.
And I remember, Ron's like, I need you to go up and share our strategy vision. And one of the first things I did is I recognized the three founders for the courage.
Sure.
The pure
Just for our cigar listeners, Matt and I worked for a company called Tenable Network Security. We probably should have done this earlier. The three founders were Renaud, Jack, and Ron. And I will say, some of the nicest people to work with. Renaud, technically, may be one of the most technically brilliant people I've ever worked with. And I've worked with some very brilliant people over the years. For some reason, Renaud just sticks out in my mind. And I don't know if you know, but Renaud have worked side by side in cyber exercises and stuff like that. And I'm just the blending of creativity and intelligence is just, it makes him amazing.
He's amazing. But those three founders had a lot of courage.
Yeah.
If you think about the life cycle of a startup, at some point you realize that you have to bring in other folks who've been there and done certain aspects of it before, right? In late 2014, in July 2014, they kind of reorged the company, kind of centralized things. I mean, I don't think most people realize that Tenable was really two companies before that. It was Nessus and Security Center. They brought them together.
I'm just watching the cameraman take shots at Jameson.
Yeah. And, to bring in the VPs that they brought in, to really bring in some of that talent, really with the vision, take the company to the next level. I mean, that takes a lot of courage to give up part of that control a little bit, to bring those in. But it really set Tenable on the path to that IPO. All working with all three of them was just a fantastic experience. Ron now has taken the work that he's done at Tenable and done a number of investments in companies, seeding new innovation in the security space. I think Ron is somebody we're going to continue to see around this industry for a while as he brings new innovative ideas and technology into the market. So it'll be really interesting to watch him to continue to grow now that he's doing his own, Gula Tech Adventures as well. Yeah.
And Ron's a big cigar guy, too, so we're going to get him in on one of these cigar conversations.
Yeah, it would
maybe not out here, because he might have left already, but...
Yeah, he left this morning.
Next time he comes up in the studio.
Yeah.
Ron and I have shared many cigars together, which is awesome.
All right. Do I have any good cigar questions left for you?
Yeah, you got at least one more, Matt. Come on. Number 13 is good. You'll appreciate
Number 13 is good?
Yeah.
Oh, what is the country of origin of the Cameroon wrapper?
It is the country of Cameroon in Africa. And a lot of people don't know this. We've done a segment on Cameroon as one of our most popular segments ever on the Stogie Geeks, because most people don't know it's a Cameroon wrapper. Like, I think it's a kind of plant, or it's grown in Dominican or something. True African Cameroon is grown in Africa. The political climate and state of that country has been under duress, to put it nicely, I think, for some time. And so, given those circumstances, getting tobacco in and out of that country to get it back into the Dominican or Nicaragua to roll those cigars, right? Because they're going to bring it back into their factory where all their rollers are to roll it. So they're just sourcing it from Africa. It's very expensive. I mean, it's expensive, baseline expensive, to grow it, to have someone grow it out there and import it.
Right.
Then you put the political climate and unstableness factor of the country in there, and there's a lot of bribes. I mean, just be flat out and honest. From what I'm told, there's a lot of bribes that you got to pay to get that tobacco out.
Right.
There's a lot of extra taxes
that are
applied.
There's a lot of extra costs that are built into that process. Now, so what is a Cameroon wrapper used for? What makes it distinct?
Sure.
I'm just curious why that wrapper?
Why go through the trouble, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some value there from a cigar perspective.
It's a very thin and light wrapper, so it's not one I would smoke in conditions like this in the pool area or extreme cold. Like, when I smoke Cameroon wrappers, it's usually in an indoor controlled environment because it's such a thin wrapper.
So is it delicate?
It's very delicate, so if the tobacco expands or contracts too much, it'll actually crack while you're smoking it. So, but it has a very sweet, I wouldn't say floral, I would say more of a sweet woody nose. It's a very distinct flavor when a cigar has a truly African Cameroon wrapper apply to it. There are some very iconic cigars that carry this wrapper. Arturo Fuente, Don Carlos carries a true. And some have switched because of the trouble coming out of Africa. La Aurora has done a lot with African Cameroon, and when I ask about Manuel, their master blender, he's like, he's like, that brand still does use it, but we don't want to source too much because it's too expensive, or we can't source enough of it. So they take the seeds and they grow them in the Dominican. So there's Dominican Cameroon, there's Ecuadorian, so in whatever
kind of
country
what they did with Connecticut broadleaf.
Exactly. So it's not the same. I don't think it's as good. Most smokers don't think it's good. It lets you get into that Cameroon wrapper at a much cheaper price because they don't have to worry about, they grow it on their own farm. They're not paying all the bribes to get it out of Cameroon.
Yeah.
So. But the true African Cameroon will also age very well too. If that cigar is aged for 3, 5, 10 years, it holds up and it holds its flavor really well. I've had some really aged Cameroon wrapped cigars, and they're some of my favorite cigars to smoke.
They're probably some of your most expensive too.
No, actually not.
No?
Actually not. I mean, they are. I mean, they're probably more in the $15 range. Like, you're probably not going to find True African Cameroon in the $5 sub range, right? It is going to be a premium cigar, but it's not going to be like a super rare cigar like I was telling you about at Casa Fuente, where they have those rare cigars that are like $35, $50, or $75 a piece.
Exactly. Okay.
Awesome. Well, that was fun. What do you say we call it?
Yeah, we call it
at this
a day.
point. We covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we could go into various tangents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Matt, thank you for doing the first cigar conversations with me.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this interview from Las Vegas. If you want to watch and learn more, go to securityweekly.com/summercamp18 or go to our YouTube channel, Security Weekly, to view the playlist.